What started as barely noticeable details spiraled into nightmares that still haunt the victims in ways they didn't expect. And I need to warn you, what you're about to hear will make you second-guess every small, strange thing that happens in your life. Story 1. The Smell. This happened on March 8, 2018, in a small rental house in Eugene, Oregon. Katie Morrison, a 26-year-old graphic designer, had just moved in 2 weeks earlier. The house was perfect for her budget with 2 bedrooms, a quiet neighborhood, and hardwood floors. The landlord seemed nice enough, an older man named Frank who owned several properties in the area. Everything about the place felt right. She'd unpacked most of her boxes, set up her home office in the second bedroom, and was finally starting to feel settled. Her cat, Miso, had adjusted quickly too, claiming the sunny spot by the living room window as his territory. But on that March evening, Katie noticed something odd. A smell, faint but distinct, like rotting fruit mixed with something else she couldn't identify. Something organic. Something wasn't right. At first, she thought maybe she'd forgotten to take out the trash. She checked the kitchen bin. It was empty. She looked under the sink, behind the fridge, even in the cabinets. Nothing. The smell wasn't strong enough to be alarming, just annoying. She opened the windows, lit a candle, and went to bed thinking it would be gone by morning. It wasn't. The next day, the smell was stronger. Still not overwhelming, but definitely more noticeable. Katie spent her lunch break crawling around the kitchen on her hands and knees, sniffing like a bloodhound. She checked the dishwasher, the garbage disposal, and every corner. Nothing. That's when Miso started acting strange. The cat refused to go into the second bedroom, the room Katie used as her office. Whenever she tried to carry him in there, he'd scramble out of her arms, claws out, genuinely panicked. She'd never seen him act like that before. That night, Katie sat at her desk trying to work, but the smell was stronger in this room, much stronger, and it was definitely coming from inside the walls. She pressed her ear against the drywall, listening. Nothing. Just the smell, getting worse by the hour. She called her landlord the next morning. Frank said he'd send someone to check it out, probably just a dead mouse in the walls. He promised to have someone there by the end of the week, but Katie couldn't wait that long. By day 4, the smell was unbearable. She'd moved her office setup to the living room, but even with the door to the second bedroom closed, the stench was seeping through. She slept with her bedroom door closed and a towel stuffed under it, but she could still smell it in her dreams. Miso stopped eating. The cat would sit in the living room, staring at the closed office door, his tail twitching. Sometimes Katie would wake up in the middle of the night to find him sitting outside her bedroom door, just staring down the hallway toward that room. And the smell kept getting worse. Sweet. Cloying. Like something was decomposing just feet away from where she slept. On day 6, Frank finally sent someone, a maintenance guy named Luis who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He spent maybe 10 minutes in the house, mostly in the office, sniffing around. Probably just a dead rat in the walls, Luis said, his hand already on the doorknob, ready to leave. Happens all the time. Give it another week, it'll dry out and the smell will fade.
A week?
Katie's voice cracked.
I can't live like this for another week.
Luis shrugged. Not much else I can do without tearing open the walls. He left. Katie stood in her living room, fighting the urge to scream. That night, Katie couldn't sleep. The smell had gotten worse somehow, almost sweet now, mixed with that underlying rot. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, when she heard it. A scratching sound, coming from the office. Soft at first, then louder, rhythmic, deliberate. Katie grabbed her phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked down the hallway, her heart hammered in her chest. The smell got stronger with each step. When she reached the office door, she pressed her ear against it. The scratching stopped. She stood there for a full minute, barely breathing. Nothing, just that horrible smell, so strong now it made her eyes water. Slowly, she turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. The room looked exactly as she'd left it. Desk, computer, boxes she hadn't unpacked yet, nothing out of place. But the smell was overpowering now, making her gag, and it was definitely coming from the far wall, the wall that backed up to the garage. Then she heard it again, the scratching, not from inside the room, from inside the wall itself. Katie grabbed a hammer from her toolbox. She couldn't spend another night in this house without knowing what was behind that wall. She started small, tapping at the drywall, looking for a spot that sounded hollow. When she found it, she swung harder. The hammer punched through easily, revealing the dark space between the studs. The smell that rushed out made her stumble backward, gagging. She covered her nose and mouth with her shirt and approached the hole again, shining her phone light inside. At first, she couldn't process what she was seeing. Just shapes, plastic, something wrapped in garbage bags. Then she saw the hand. Katie ran out of the room, out of the house, into her car. She called 911 from the driveway, her voice barely coherent between sobs. The police arrived within minutes. 3 squad cars, lights flashing. They evacuated her, wouldn't let her back inside. She sat in the back of one of the cars, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, watching officers stream in and out of her house. An hour later, a detective approached her car. She introduced herself as Detective Sarah Reeves.
Miss Morrison,
She said carefully.
we're going to need you to come down to the station to answer some questions.
What was it? Katie's voice shook. What was inside my wall? Detective Reeves paused, choosing her words.
We found human remains. We'll need to investigate further, but it appears they've been there for some time.
The world tilted. Katie gripped the car door to steady herself. The investigation revealed that Frank's previous tenant, a 31-year-old woman named Rachel Dunn, had been reported missing 8 months earlier. She'd simply vanished from the house in the middle of her lease. Her family had filed a missing persons report, but with no signs of foul play and Rachel's history of depression, police had assumed she'd run off somewhere to start over. Frank had claimed he didn't know what happened to her, said she'd just stopped paying rent and disappeared, leaving her belongings behind. He'd waited the legally required time, cleaned out her stuff, and rented the house to Katie, but Rachel had never left the house. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the back of her skull. The investigation into Frank intensified. They searched his other properties and found evidence linking him to 3 other missing persons cases spanning the last decade, all young women, all renters, all dismissed as runaways or suicide. Frank was arrested on March 15, 2018, exactly 1 week after Katie first noticed the smell. Frank was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Story 2. The Scratch. This story involves something even more ordinary, a scratch. Just a tiny scratch that a man got while hiking with his family. What happened next turned a beautiful vacation into every parent's worst nightmare. This happened on June 15, 2020, at Yellowstone National Park. Michael Torres, a 38-year-old accountant from Denver, had planned this trip for months. He, his wife Jessica, and their 2 kids, Emma, age 7, and Nathan, age 10, had driven 8 hours to spend a week exploring the park. They'd been there for 3 days already, and everything was perfect. The weather was beautiful, the kids were having a blast, and Michael felt like he was finally getting a real break from work. On their 4th day, they decided to hike the Storm Point Trail, a moderate 2.3-mile loop along the shore of Yellowstone Lake. The trail was busy that morning, packed with families like theirs. Michael felt safe, even when they passed signs warning about wildlife. There were enough people around that he didn't worry too much about encounters with bears or elk. Around the halfway point of the loop, Nathan ran ahead, excited to see something off the trail. Michael called after him, telling him to stay on the path, but Nathan had already disappeared into the brush. Jessica stayed with Emma while Michael jogged after his son. He found Nathan about 30 feet off the trail, crouched down, looking at something on the ground. "Dad, look!" Nathan pointed at what appeared to be animal tracks in the soft earth. "Are these bear tracks?" Michael examined them. They looked like dog prints, actually. Probably a coyote. He was about to tell Nathan to head back to the trail when he noticed something else. A dead bird, lying a few feet away. Its body was twisted at an odd angle, and there was something wrong with its feathers. They looked wet, matted with something dark. "Don't touch anything," Michael said, grabbing Nathan's hand. "Let's go back." As they turned to leave, Michael's hand brushed against a low-hanging branch. He felt a sharp sting on his forearm and looked down to see a thin scratch, maybe 2 inches long. Not deep, barely bleeding. He thought nothing of it. They rejoined Jessica and Emma on the trail and continued their hike. The scratch on Michael's arm stopped bleeding within minutes. He didn't even mention it. That evening, back at their cabin, Michael noticed the scratch was red. Not just red around the edges, the entire length of it had turned a dark crimson color, raised slightly above the surrounding skin. It itched terribly. Jessica looked at it and frowned. "That doesn't look right. When did you get that?" "This morning on the hike, just caught it on a branch. It shouldn't be that inflamed already." "Did you wash it?" Michael shrugged. "No, it was barely bleeding. I'll put some antibacterial cream on it." He did, but by bedtime, the scratch felt hot to the touch. The redness had spread, creating a halo around the original wound. Michael took some ibuprofen and went to bed, figuring it would be better in the morning. It wasn't. Michael woke up around 3 a.m. with his arm throbbing. When he turned on the lamp, he saw that the redness had spread up his forearm, almost to his elbow. Dark red lines radiated from the scratch, following what he realized were his veins. Jess? He shook his wife awake. Jess, look at this. Jessica took one look and her face went pale. That's blood poisoning. We need to get you to a hospital. Now. They woke the kids, threw on clothes, and piled into the car. The nearest hospital was in Livingston, Montana, about 50 miles away. Michael drove while Jessica called ahead to let them know they were coming. By the time they reached the emergency room, Michael was running a fever. The red lines had spread past his elbow, creeping up his bicep toward his shoulder. The scratch itself had turned black. The ER doctor took one look and immediately ordered IV antibiotics. They admitted Michael, moved him to a room, and started running tests: blood cultures, CT scans, tissue samples from around the wound. The doctor explained that Michael had developed a serious infection, likely from bacteria that had been on whatever scratched him. In rare cases, certain bacteria can cause rapid-onset cellulitis and septicemia. Without treatment, it could lead to septic shock, organ failure, or death. The antibiotics worked, but slowly. Michael spent 3 days in the hospital while doctors monitored his white blood cell count and the progress of the infection. The red lines gradually faded, the fever broke, and the wound started to heal. On the 4th day, a doctor Michael hadn't met before entered his room. She introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Chen, an infectious disease specialist from Salt Lake City. Mr. Torres, she said, closing the door behind her, I need to ask you some questions about where you got that scratch. Michael recounted the hike, the moment his arm caught the branch, the dead bird nearby. Dr. Chen listened intently, taking notes. The bacteria we cultured from your wound, she said carefully. It's not something we normally see. Not in this region, not in this climate. We've sent samples to the CDC for analysis, but preliminary results show a strain of bacteria that's typically found in tropical environments, specifically in contaminated water sources. Contaminated water? In Yellowstone? That's what doesn't make sense. Dr. Chen pulled up a chair. Mr. Torres, has anyone else in your family shown any symptoms? Fever? Rash? Stomach issues? Michael shook his head. No, everyone's fine. Why? Dr. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. We've had 4 other patients admitted to hospitals in Montana and Wyoming over the past 2 weeks with similar infections. All of them got scratched or cut while hiking in or near Yellowstone. All of them developed rapid-onset bacterial infections, and 2 of them died before we could identify the correct antibiotic treatment. The room felt suddenly colder. You're saying this is an outbreak? We don't know yet. The CDC is investigating. But Mr. Torres, I need you to think very carefully. Was there anything unusual about that area where you got scratched? Anything at all that seemed off? Michael closed his eyes, trying to remember. The trail. Nathan running ahead. The dead bird with the matted feathers. The tracks, he said suddenly. Nathan thought they were bear tracks, but they looked more like dog prints. And they were weird. Too big for a coyote, too small for a wolf. And the spacing was wrong, like whatever made them was moving strangely. Dr. Chen leaned forward. What do you mean, moving strangely? The prints were overlapping in a weird pattern, like the animal was limping or dragging something. Dr. Chen made a note. Mr. Torres, I'm going to need the exact location where this happened. GPS coordinates if you have them, or as close as you can remember. She left the room and Michael could hear her on the phone in the hallway, her voice urgent but too low to make out words. An hour later, 2 people in suits arrived. They identified themselves as being from the CDC and asked Michael the same questions Dr. Chen had. Then they asked about the bird. What did it look like? How fresh did it appear? Were there any other dead animals nearby? Michael answered as best he could, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they knew something they weren't telling him. Something bad. Something they were trying to contain before it spread. Michael was discharged 2 days later with a prescription for oral antibiotics and instructions to watch for any recurring symptoms. The CDC agents told him they were investigating a potential wildlife disease outbreak and that the area where he'd been scratched was now off limits to hikers. Story 3: The Sound. It started with something people heard but couldn't see. A sound so faint, so easy to dismiss that by the time anyone realized what it meant, it was almost too late. This happened on November 2nd, 2022, in an apartment building in Portland, Oregon. Sarah Chen, a 29-year-old nurse, had lived in her ground floor unit for almost 2 years. The building was old but well-maintained, and her apartment was perfect for her, close to the hospital where she worked, affordable rent, and quiet neighbors. Sarah worked night shifts, so she slept during the day. She'd learned to tune out most sounds: traffic, footsteps from the apartment above, the building's old radiators clanking to life. But on that November morning, as she was trying to fall asleep after a 12-hour shift, she heard something new. A ticking sound, faint, rhythmic, coming from somewhere in her bedroom. Tick, tick, tick. At first, Sarah thought it was her alarm clock. She grabbed her phone. No, the alarm was off. The sound continued. Tick, tick, tick. She sat up, listening. It wasn't coming from the nightstand. It was coming from the wall that separated her apartment from the unit next door. Sarah's neighbor was an older man named Walter. She'd met him a few times in the hallway, and he seemed nice enough. Quiet, kept to himself, always polite. She'd never heard any noise from his apartment before. The ticking continued, steady, mechanical. Sarah told herself it was probably just a clock on his side of the wall, or maybe he was doing some kind of home repair. She put in earplugs and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, the ticking was still there. Sarah could hear it even through her earplugs. She pressed her ear against the wall, trying to pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It seemed to be moving. Or maybe there were multiple sources. Tick, tick, tick. Over the next few days, Sarah tried to ignore it. She played white noise through her speakers. She moved her bed to the far wall. She considered knocking on Walter's door to ask about it, but she worked nights and he seemed to be out during the day. Their schedules never lined up. By the 5th day, the ticking had gotten louder, or maybe Sarah was just becoming more attuned to it. It was driving her crazy. She barely slept. When she did sleep, she dreamed about clocks, about gears turning, about time running out. On day 7, Sarah ran into Walter in the building's lobby. He looked terrible, pale, thinner than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. "Walter?" she said, trying to sound casual. "Hey, I've been hearing this weird ticking sound through my bedroom wall. You wouldn't happen to know what that is, would you?" Walter's face went blank. "Ticking? Yeah, it's been going on for about a week. It's really faint, but—" "I don't hear anything," Walter interrupted. His voice was flat. "There's no ticking." He walked away before Sarah could respond, moving quickly for someone his age. Sarah stood in the lobby, confused. She knew what she'd heard. It wasn't her imagination. That night, the ticking was louder than ever. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her phone and called the building manager. Rita, the building manager, was apologetic but skeptical. "I'll send maintenance to check it out tomorrow," she said. "But honestly, these old buildings make all kinds of noises. It's probably just the pipes." "It's not the pipes," Sarah insisted. "It's a specific ticking sound, like a clock or a timer or something." Rita promised to look into it, but Sarah could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. The next day, Rita called. "I went by Walter's apartment," she said. "He let me in. I looked around. I didn't hear any ticking. No clocks running. No unusual sounds. I think you might be hearing something in the walls, maybe a loose pipe or air in the radiator. I can have maintenance check your apartment if you want." Sarah sat on her couch, staring at the wall. She knew what she was hearing. It wasn't her imagination. It wasn't pipes. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The ticking was constant now, louder, almost urgent. Tick, 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 like it was counting down to something. At 3:17 a.m., Sarah pressed her entire body against the wall, ear flat against the drywall, and that's when she realized something that made her blood run cold. The ticking wasn't coming from inside Walter's apartment. It was coming from inside the wall itself. Sarah grabbed her phone and called Rita again. It went to voicemail. She called building maintenance. Voicemail. She even considered calling 911. But what would she say? "There's a ticking sound in my wall?" They'd think she was crazy. By 4 a.m., Sarah had made a decision. She grabbed a hammer from her kitchen tool drawer, went into her bedroom, and started tapping along the wall, listening for hollow spaces. She found one, a section about 2 feet wide where the wall sounded different. Empty. Sarah knew she'd have to pay for repairs. She didn't care. She raised the hammer and swung. The drywall crumbled easily, revealing the space between the studs. Sarah shone her phone light into the darkness. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Just shapes, wires, little boxes. Then her brain processed it and she dropped her phone. Pipe bombs, 7 of them, wedged between the wall studs, connected by wires, all leading to a single timer device. A timer that was ticking. The digital display read 00:14:23. 14 minutes and 23 seconds, 22 seconds, 21. Sarah ran out of her apartment into the hallway, screaming. She pounded on every door, screaming for people to evacuate. Some residents opened their doors, confused and annoyed. Others ignored her completely. "There's a bomb!" Sarah screamed. "Everyone out! Now!" She ran to Walter's apartment and pounded on his door. No answer. She tried the handle. It was locked. Residents were starting to emerge now, some in bathrobes, some still half asleep. Sarah's terror was contagious. People started moving toward the exits. Sarah called 911 as she ran down the stairs. "There are bombs in the wall," she gasped into the phone. 7 bombs, timer showing 12 minutes, 1847 Southeast Morrison Street, ground floor. The operator was asking questions. but Sarah barely heard them. She burst out of the building into the cold November air. Other residents were streaming out now, clustering on the sidewalk across the street. "Where's Walter?" someone asked. "Has anyone seen Walter?" The police arrived within minutes, then the bomb squad. The street was evacuated. Sarah stood behind a police barricade, watching the bomb squad enter her building in full protective gear. Walter never came out of his apartment. When the bomb squad finally entered his unit, they found him dead in his bed. He'd taken a massive dose of sleeping pills sometime the night before. On his nightstand was a note, typed and printed on plain white paper. "I wanted them to know what it feels like. I wanted them to suffer, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't be responsible for that. I'm sorry." The investigation revealed that Walter had been planning the bombing for months. He'd lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier and blamed the hospital where Sarah worked. The same hospital that had fired him from his job as a maintenance worker 5 years ago. He'd become obsessed with revenge, stockpiling materials, building the bombs, planting them in the wall between his apartment and Sarah's. The bombs would have destroyed Sarah's apartment, Walter's apartment, and likely caused catastrophic damage to the entire ground floor of the building. At least 20 people would have died, maybe more. All of them were saved because Sarah couldn't sleep through a ticking sound.